I'm making a video response to the user supersummersalts, who made a video response to my video about learning photography on film versus digital. Now, he presented an argument which I heard from several people in the comments section, which is partly what inspired me to respond, which is that when you have a roll of film and it's 24 shots or 36 shots, that this instills a certain kind of discipline in the way that you take your pictures. You're going to be much more considerate of what you're doing and how you're taking the picture when you don't have a memory card that can hold hundreds or thousands of shots. Now, while I certainly agree that you do need, if you're serious about photography, the sort of discipline in which you're actually considering all the different aspects of your photograph and how you're taking your photograph when you shoot, every time that you take a picture, the problem, the Achilles heel of this argument is that my argument was only meant to say, not that you shouldn't learn film at all, not that film isn't valuable, not that they shouldn't have classes about film photography, simply that they shouldn't teach, say, Photography 101 or the basics of photography with film. And that's because when you go to take that perfect shot in the 24 or 36 shots that you have to already have a fair amount of background knowledge about how to set all of these different things in manual mode. He showed a Canon AT1, which is a camera that I also happen to own, and he said that this is the ideal camera. It's fully manual, all the exposure controls are manual, the lens focusing is manual, and he said that this is ideal to learn on because you have to stop and consider everything. Now, I have to point out that I have no difficulty. I just turn the dial and now I'm in total manual mode. I flip a switch, now the lens is focusing in manual, and so basically I have something very similar with my digital camera. I can shoot completely in manual and in focus in manual as well with a digital SLR just as easily as I can with the Canon T2i, which I also own. But you already have to understand aperture and shutter speed and these sorts of things before you go and take that perfect shot. And you also have to understand how the medium will respond and what kind of latitude that you're going to have. He also says that the back screens, the preview screen, is worthless when you're taking a picture. Now, I certainly wouldn't advise, unless you're taking a shot which is like from some angle that you can't really get at looking through the lens, that I wouldn't advise using something like live view. This is the live view mode. I wouldn't recommend using that for general picture shooting. I would definitely recommend actually looking through the lens itself, because you get a much more accurate representation of a lot of things. Although the live view, at least on these cameras, is not bad. On point and shoots, live view is not so great. A couple of things that you didn't point out, that he didn't point out when he was saying that this screen is useless. This is just some random picture that I took of my computer, and I'm not sure how well this is going to show, but on pretty much any camera, digital SLRs, and even on you know the less expensive point and shoots, you can actually zoom in the picture and zoom out. On this, it's these two buttons here. On point and shoots, it's usually just the zoom button on your camera. You can zoom in and out in your picture and get a pretty good idea of whether, you know, how sharp your picture is. Also, on this camera, I can hit the display mode a couple times. It will show me all the information about what, you know, the shutter, what all my settings were, a histogram, and in this you probably can't see it, and there aren't really too many of them in this anyway. It will blink like in black the areas where you have overexposed highlights and things like that. So worthless? Hardly. That's actually a great learning tool when you can take a picture and then be able to tell without having to, you know, go around with a notebook every time you take a picture, writing down all your settings. The advantage of digital that you actually have the flexibility to change your ISO on the fly. You're not stuck with whatever the color temperature of the film in terms of white balance is when you put it in. You're not stuck with if it's 100, 200, you know, 200, 400. ISO, whatever it is. When you first, you're not stuck with that for 24 shots, so you're not as limited, and you can be more flexible in the way that you take your pictures. If we want to go further in the direction of taking better pictures and the advantages of digital, or even the advantages of a camera built after 1970, is that you can also choose the metering mode on the fly. Now, this is something which better film cameras have, but for example, you have evaluative meter mode. This is better than center weighted average, which is the metering mode that the AT1 has, which takes the center of the frame and averages based on that. Evaluative is a light metering system which will take the entirety of the frame and average the light values from there rather than just the center portion of the frame. Partial metering and spot metering are also two modes that the AT1 and older cameras do not have, and these really let you select a very specific area of your photograph and then hit exposure lock and really dial in your exposure based on what can be a very tiny point of the image. And that is an incredibly useful tool for getting correct exposure and really dialing in your exposure that at the very least that older cameras that are fully manual do not have. And that's another aspect of photography that's just one of those things that you have to learn. When you have an older camera, you're just sort of stuck with the limitations of, say, only having one metering mode. Now, the last point he made was that he hears from a lot of people that you cannot edit photographs that are from film on your computer and things like that. And so he holds up a disc from, CVS Pharmacy or wherever it is, and says, they put the pictures on the disc for you, and you can edit them all you want. Now, this is one of those things where I don't mean to be a dick here, but my best advice would be to throw those discs away and save the $5 that you're spending on getting these discs, and buy a scanner that will develop film negatives. Whenever you're talking about capturing something physical and converting it into digital, you're limited by a combination of the physical size of whatever it is versus the resolution of what is scanning it. And so when you have a 35mm piece of film that's like this big, and you go to scan it with a scanner that has, maybe can do 1600 or 1200 dots per square inch. Basically, at best, at least with my film scanner, and there are better ones out there, you can only get the equivalent of a 2 megapixel picture. Now, when you convert it into JPEG, there's more information lost right there. If you actually have your own negative scanner, even though you're only getting a 2 megapixel picture, which is nothing compared to my 18 megapixel camera, you do have more latitude when you can capture it into something like a digital negative if you have decent scanning software that will allow you to capture it into a digital negative. JPEGs to me are pretty much worthless. I shoot entirely in RAW mode, and when I capture film on a scan, I save it as a digital negative. And this is something I would definitely recommend to do. I don't recommend this to everybody, but if you're serious about photography, I definitely recommend shooting in RAW mode. Even though it takes up a lot of space, you have a lot more latitude in editing. Of course, this is definitely something you have to look into and see if it's right for you, because it takes up a lot of space. You pretty much have to process everything unless you shoot in RAW plus JPEG, which might slow down, say, the burst mode of your camera, depending on the speed of your card, and it takes up a lot more space on your computer, requires special processing and that sort of thing. But it does give you a lot more latitude when editing. A JPEG from a scan of your negative that you're getting from Walgreens or someplace like that, you don't really have control over how they're processing that image, and you're definitely much better off saving if you're serious about editing from your negatives, you're much better off saving your money from these discs and going out and investing in some sort of film scanner. You can get them for fairly cheap and ranging to very expensive depending on how good you want yours to be. But again, it still doesn't really compare to my 18 megapixel pictures shot in RAW mode. In order to get the advantages of film, you have to have a more physical apparatus. I really think that the sort of advantages of film are cut to virtually nothing when the chips are down, because in order to maximize the advantages, like what little advantage it has in resolution, you have to print fairly large. Well, how often do you need to print so large that the differences would be noticeable between a digital image and JPEG? It does have tonal quality differences. Film still has a bit more latitude, but again, it's all about how can you realistically exploit these things. Why do you need that much latitude? When are you actually going to use these sorts of things? All these things have to be understood and then taken into consideration. And digital has come a long way in terms of catching up to film. And just, yes, you can pay $5 extra or $3 extra and get a disc with JPEGs from Walmart or CVS or Walgreens or your favorite photo processing place and edit them on the computer, but it's nowhere near the sort of refinement that you can get with digital. And again, a lot of people seem to think that, oh, now that it's all on a computer, that this takes the craft or the artistry out of it. No. There is a sort of point where it's like, where's the point where we can say this image has been pushed so much that you're really cheating, that it's no longer a matter of photographic skill. But I can typically, having worked in all of these things, I can spot something that was dialed in with a preset versus something that was actually, usually, something that was put care into and actually took a lot of, skill in tweaking to refine just so. So I really don't see this as any sort of, I really see film as being at a big disadvantage here, a substantial disadvantage when it comes to being able to edit on your computer. Again, you already have to know in advance how to manipulate all of these different things before you can take the quote-unquote perfect shot with the 24 or 36 shots that you have available to you. You typically don't have a choice of metering mode or white balance. You don't have the level of control or the information after the fact as to what your settings were, or be able to see on the fly where your highlights are blown out and all these other settings. You can set your digital camera to, or at least a good one, to all manual with manual focus. I really don't see there being any real advantage. And again, I really think that a lot of this comes down to practice and understanding these things. And practice, like going into a batting cage or a driving range, takes just repetition and a lot of practice. Yes, you also need the discipline where you're carefully considering each individual aspect. But in order to get to that point where you know, okay, I need this aperture, this shutter speed, and that sort of thing, you already have to have some sort of understanding of these things in advance, which is to me, what I see is the advantage of learning at least the basic skills on digital. And then film is something that's a bit more advanced, that should have its own separate classes, and you should understand the nuances of the differences in the different processing techniques between the two. To me, if you're a photography major and you think that JPEGs from a Walgreens off a disc that are scans of your image is a good processing method, then that honestly sends a sort of red flag to me that you're not quite up to speed on this sort of digital workflow. And that to me is sad, because digital is something that you are probably going to wind up using for the majority of your work in photography, because it's what's most convenient for most situations. And that's just sort of the reality of photography in the 21st century. And so you have to understand the digital workflow, and I feel that a lot of these photography majors are being handicapped in that regard. And it's all catch up. I don't understand why people are sort of afraid of learning things like Lightroom or shooting in RAW or understanding the difference between a digital negative and a JPEG and all of these sorts of things that are involved in digital post-processing, because really the relevance of analog processing and film processing is fading fast. And yes, it still has its place, it still has its advantages and its own nuances and craft to it, but you know, that's that. This has gone way too long already, but hopefully, even though this was a video response to a specific person, that general people have got something of use out of this video.